I was 34 years old, and I thought I had a stable marriage, until one ordinary Tuesday morning shattered everything I believed about my life. It didn't start with an affair. It didn't start with lies or secrets. It started with breakfast. I was sitting at our kitchen table, hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee, staring out the window as sunlight spilled across the counter in soft golden streaks. The neighborhood was quiet. The world felt calm. For a brief moment, I let myself believe this was what safety looked like. Routine, familiarity, the quiet comfort of a shared life. Then my husband walked in. Daniel didn't say hello. He didn't sit down. He stood there with his arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes sharp, already angry. I knew that look. It was the look that meant I was about to be blamed. The night before, his sister had called him again. Another crisis, another emotional plea. This time, she needed $8,000 for a business opportunity that was supposed to change her life forever. I had heard that promise more times than I could count during our 5-year marriage. Every version ended the same way. Our money gone, her life unchanged, and me expected to stay quiet. "You're not listening," Daniel said sharply. "Family helps family. You're being selfish." I tried to stay calm. I really did. I set my coffee down slowly, like careful movements might keep the conversation from exploding. "I'm not saying no to helping," I said. "I'm saying we need boundaries. We can't keep draining ourselves." That was when his expression changed. Something dark passed through his eyes. Rage mixed with entitlement, with certainty that I was wrong and he was right. And before I could react, before I could even understand what was happening, he grabbed his coffee mug and hurled it straight at my face. The heat hit first. Scalding. Shocking. Painful. I sat there frozen, coffee dripping from my face, my skin burning, while the man I married stared back at me. And then he said something that changed everything. "You pushed me to this." That was the moment I knew. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about his sister. This was about control. And my marriage had been broken long before that coffee ever left his hands. Before that morning, before the coffee and the silence and the burning on my skin, I truly believed I had built a good life. I was 34. I worked a stable office job, nothing glamorous but reliable. I liked structure, plans, predictability. I was the kind of woman who paid bills on time, remembered birthdays, and believed that if you put in enough effort, most problems could be solved with patience and communication. Daniel used to love that about me. We met in our late 20s at a friend's housewarming party. I remember noticing him because he laughed easily, loud, confident, the kind of man people gravitated toward without effort. He made me feel chosen, seen. When he asked for my number that night, it felt simple, natural, like the start of something safe. The early years were good, really good. We stayed up late in our tiny apartment, eating burned dinners and talking about the future. He teased me for labeling pantry shelves. I teased him for never folding laundry properly. We talked about growing old together in hypotheticals that felt romantic instead of terrifying. When he proposed, he knelt in our living room with trembling hands and a ring I knew he'd spent weeks choosing. I cried. I said yes without hesitation. I thought love was enough. What I didn't understand back then was how quietly patterns form. How dysfunction doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in, wearing the mask of loyalty. His sister had always been part of our relationship, from the very beginning. At first it was small things. A few $100s here, help with rent there. Daniel framed it as temporary. She's just going through a rough patch. I believed him because I wanted to. Because I thought compassion meant sacrifice, and because I didn't want to be the woman who made him choose between me and his family. Over time, the requests grew. So did the expectations. Every time I hesitated, Daniel reminded me what marriage meant. We're a team. You don't abandon family. If the roles were reversed, I'd do this for you. I started doubting myself. Maybe I was too rigid, too focused on numbers instead of people, too cold. I didn't notice how often my needs came last, how conversations only ended when I gave in, how disagreement slowly became disrespect. There were signs. Looking back, they were everywhere. The way he spoke over me when money came up. The way he dismissed my concerns as overreactions. The way guilt always landed squarely on my shoulders. But nothing ever felt bad enough to walk away. That's the most dangerous place to be. Because by the time something finally is bad enough, you've already lost pieces of yourself trying to make it work. That Tuesday morning didn't feel special when it began. It felt ordinary, almost peaceful. I remember thinking, maybe today will be quiet. Maybe we'd both rush off to work, exchange a quick kiss, and avoid the topic that had been poisoning our home for years. I was wrong. Daniel's sister had called late the night before. I heard his voice through the bedroom wall, low, urgent, protective. By the time he hung up, I already knew what was coming. My body recognized the pattern before my mind caught up. Still, I hoped, foolishly. When Daniel walked into the kitchen, the tension arrived with him. His posture was rigid, shoulders squared like he'd already decided the outcome of the conversation. He didn't ask how I slept. He didn't sit down. He stood over the table like a judge. "She needs $8,000, he said flatly. No discussion, no context, just a demand. I felt my stomach tighten. I stared at the steam rising from my coffee, buying myself a few seconds to breathe. "For what?" I asked carefully. He exhaled sharply, already annoyed. "A business opportunity. This one's real." I had heard that sentence so many times, it almost sounded scripted. I set my mug down slowly. My heart was pounding, but my voice stayed calm. "Daniel, we've talked about this. We can't keep doing this. We need boundaries." That word, boundaries, hit him like an insult. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened. "So you're saying no?" "I'm saying we need to think," I replied. "About us. About our future." Something snapped. "You're unbelievable," he said, voice rising. "You act like my family is a burden." "I'm acting like our marriage matters," I said, "like our finances matter." He stepped closer, too close. "You don't understand family," he said. "You've never had to." The words were deliberate, a weapon he'd used before, and they landed exactly where he intended. I felt something crack inside me, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult him. I stayed seated, palms flat against the table, grounding myself. And then it happened. He grabbed his coffee mug with both hands and threw it at me. There was no warning, no pause, just rage in motion. The coffee hit my face like fire. I gasped as the heat burned my skin, my eyes watering instantly. Liquid soaked my hair, my blouse, my chest. The mug clattered loudly against the table, the sound echoing through the kitchen like a gunshot. For a moment, everything stopped. I sat there stunned, coffee dripping onto the floor, my face burning, my hands shaking. The shock was worse than the pain. Daniel stood frozen across from me, and then, before I could even speak, he said it. "You pushed me to that." That was the instant the illusion shattered. Not because of the coffee, but because of the certainty in his voice. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. Coffee dripped from my hair onto my hands, onto the floor, onto the space between my feet. My skin burned, but the heat felt distant, muted by something heavier settling in my chest. Shock. I stared at Daniel, trying to understand how the man standing in front of me was the same one who once promised to protect me. "You pushed me to that." The words echoed louder than the sound of the mug hitting the table. I reached for the napkins on the counter with trembling fingers, pressing them gently against my face. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened microwave door. Red skin, wide eyes, disbelief written plainly across my features. "What the hell did you just do?" I asked quietly. He didn't apologize. He didn't rush toward me. Instead, he crossed his arms again, defensive, annoyed. "I didn't mean to," he said, already minimizing it. "You just wouldn't stop." I stood slowly, coffee still soaking my clothes. My voice was calm, but it felt like it came from somewhere deeper than fear. You threw something at me. He scoffed. It was coffee. You're acting like I assaulted you. The dismissal hurt more than the burn. You don't get to decide how this affects me, I said. You don't get to hurt me and then tell me it doesn't count. Something shifted in his expression. Not guilt, not regret, but panic. The look of someone losing control. If you had just helped my sister, he snapped, none of this would have happened. That was it. The moment clarity cut through the confusion. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't stress. This was entitlement. I felt strangely steady as I said, I need space. I turned away before he could respond. In the bathroom, cold water ran over my face as I leaned against the sink, breathing through the sting. Red marks bloomed across my skin. They'd fade, but something else wouldn't. I looked at myself and asked a question I'd avoided for years. When did I start accepting this as normal? I didn't go back into the kitchen right away. I stayed in the bathroom longer than necessary, letting the cold water run, letting the quiet settle. My face still burned, but it was the kind of pain that kept me anchored, present, unable to pretend nothing had happened. When I finally stepped out, the house felt different, too quiet, too tense. Daniel wasn't in the kitchen anymore. His mug still sat on the table, tipped on its side, a brown stain spreading across the wood, like evidence no one wanted to acknowledge. I changed my blouse, hands shaking as I buttoned a clean one. The act felt symbolic, even if I didn't fully understand why yet, like shedding something I'd been wearing for too long. My phone buzzed. A message from his sister. Did he talk to you? We really need the money. He said you were being difficult. My chest tightened. She already knew. And she'd already chosen a side. Before I could respond, Daniel appeared in the doorway, his expression cold and resolved. Not apologetic, not ashamed, certain. She's stressed, he said. You don't need to make this worse. I didn't, I replied. You did. His eyes hardened. You're turning this into something it's not. That sentence, again. Minimize, deflect, blame. By the afternoon, his mother called, then an aunt, then another message, this time framed as concern for him. No one asked if I was okay. No one mentioned the coffee. The narrative had already been rewritten. I was the obstacle, the unreasonable one, the wife who didn't support family. Daniel didn't stop it. He watched it happen. That night, the arguments returned. Longer, deeper, uglier. He accused me of being controlling, of caring more about money than people, of embarrassing him by overreacting. I realized then how alone I truly was inside my own marriage. And somewhere beneath the hurt, something else began to take shape. Resolve. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on my side of the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Daniel's breathing as if it belonged to a stranger. Every time I closed my eyes, the image replayed, the arc of the coffee, the heat, his voice telling me it was my fault. My body ached with exhaustion, but my mind refused to rest. I replayed our marriage like a film I could no longer pause. Every time I swallowed my words. Every time I apologized first just to end an argument. Every time I told myself, this is just how relationships are. The worst part wasn't the violence. It was the realization that I had been slowly trained to doubt my own reality. By morning, my phone was heavy with messages. None from Daniel asking if I was okay. Only reminders of responsibility, obligation, sacrifice. I felt small in a way I hadn't since I was a child. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped together, trying to breathe through the pressure in my chest. For the first time in years, the thought surfaced without resistance. I don't think I can do this anymore. That thought terrified me, because leaving meant failure. It meant admitting I'd been wrong. It meant facing the unknown alone. But staying felt worse. It felt like disappearing. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. The redness had faded, but my eyes looked hollow, tired. Older. I whispered, how did it get this bad? No answer came. Just silence. And in that silence, I reached the lowest point I'd ever known. Not dramatic, not loud, just heavy with the weight of truth I could no longer ignore. The shift didn't come with a scream or a slammed door. It came quietly. I was sitting alone at the kitchen table later that morning, the same place where everything had fallen apart, staring at the faint stain still etched into the wood. Daniel had already left for work. No apology, no note, just absence. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't his family. It was a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in months, my closest friend, the one Daniel never liked, the one he said didn't respect our marriage. Hey, I know this is random, but are you okay? I had a weird feeling and wanted to check in. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then my hands started shaking. I typed back 3 words. Can I come over? The reply came almost instantly. Of course, anytime. As I grabbed my keys, I realized something important. Daniel had never forbidden me from seeing my friends outright. He'd just made it uncomfortable enough that I stopped on my own. That realization stung. The drive felt surreal, like I was moving through a different version of my life. When I arrived, my friend took one look at my face and didn't ask questions, just pulled me inside and handed me a warm mug of tea. I told her everything. The money, the arguments, the coffee. She listened without interrupting, without excusing him, without telling me what I should do. When I finished, she said something simple. This isn't love. This is control. The words settled into me like truth, finally finding its place. For the first time, I didn't argue. I didn't defend him. I didn't minimize what happened. I felt something unlock. I wasn't weak for wanting peace. I wasn't cruel for setting boundaries. And I wasn't wrong for expecting respect. When I left her place later that afternoon, the world felt different. Not lighter, but clearer. I knew what I had to do. I didn't announce my decision. I didn't threaten. I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I simply stopped participating. That alone was enough to shake the entire system Daniel had built around himself. I stayed with my friend for a few nights. The first evening, Daniel called 6 times. I let them ring. Then the messages started, confused at first, then irritated, then sharp with accusation. You're being dramatic. We need to talk like adults. You're making this worse than it needs to be. I didn't reply. For the first time in our marriage, I wasn't explaining myself. By the 3rd day, the story shifted. His family stopped calling me and started calling him. Without me there to fund the emergencies, the pressure turned inward. His sister called him again, then again. The money didn't appear, and something else happened, something he hadn't anticipated. People started asking questions. Why was I staying somewhere else? Why wasn't I at family dinners? Why did Daniel look so unsteady? I didn't tell anyone my side. I didn't have to. The truth has a way of surfacing when control disappears. Daniel showed up at my friend's door one evening, eyes tired, voice lowered. You're really doing this? He asked. I looked at him calmly. No anger, no tears. I'm choosing myself. That was when his certainty collapsed. Without me smoothing things over, without me absorbing the blame, the dynamic shifted. His family grew distant. His sister stopped calling, at least for money. And Daniel was left facing the consequences alone. I didn't gloat. I didn't punish. I simply walked away. And that was enough. I didn't rebuild my life overnight. Healing didn't arrive in a single moment of triumph or clarity. It came quietly, in small decisions that slowly added up to something steadier and stronger than the life I'd left behind. I found an apartment filled with light. Not the kind you design for guests, but the kind that lets you breathe. I unpacked slowly. I slept better than I had in years. I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed. Daniel tried to reach out a few more times. His messages softened, then grew defensive, then faded altogether. I never responded. Not out of bitterness, but because I no longer needed closure from someone who had already shown me who he was. I learned something important in the aftermath. Love doesn't require you to endure harm to prove loyalty. Family isn't an excuse for abuse. And boundaries aren't cruelty. They're clarity. For years, I thought strength meant staying, fixing, absorbing, holding everything together at my own expense. I was wrong. Strength was leaving without revenge, without spectacle, without explanation. If you're listening to this and wondering whether what you're experiencing is bad enough to walk away, I want you to hear this clearly. You don't need permission to choose yourself. You don't need a catastrophe to justify your pain. And you don't owe loyalty to anyone who uses it as a weapon. My life didn't end that morning in the kitchen. It began. Not with a grand escape, but with the quiet, powerful decision to stop accepting what was breaking me. And that choice changed everything.